Hey everyone, it's Miss Smith and I'm reading chapter 16. When I woke up the next morning, I had that kind of gloomy feeling you get when you think something bad is likely to happen. I tried to go back to sleep again, but I couldn't. I looked at the calendar on the wall where I'd been crossing off the days. Today was Wednesday, October 2nd, and that meant I would have to go back to school in 5 more days. And then I thought if they were going to kill Uncle Beasley, I wouldn't want to stay around here when that happened. And so I better go back to Freedom and go back to school and just try to forget about the whole thing. But it would be awful going back to school before I was supposed to, and everyone would ask what the matter was, and I have to keep explaining to tell people all the time, and I sure wouldn't enjoy that very much. When everything has gone all wrong and the luck's all against you, you just don't feel like going around talking about it. Well, I went in to see if Dr. Zymer was awake, and he was shaping. "Good morning, Nate," he said. "How about running down to the store and getting a quart of milk and a loaf of bread? And while you're at it, pick up a newspaper, will you? I want to see how Senator Granderson is getting along." I was back in a few minutes, and the doctor was sitting at the table. "Read me the news while I make the toast," he said. He stuck a fork into a slice of bread and held it over the gas flame on the stove. I turned to the news about Congress. Dinosaur bill debated in Senate, Washington, October 4. The Senate wrangled until a late hour last night over the bill proposed by Senator Granderson. This bill, if made law, will outlaw all dinosaurs in the United States. Senator Tarboy spoke in favor of the bill and proposed an amendment to the effect that the present dinosaur be stuffed at government expense and presented to Senator Granderson. Senator Tarboy is a member of the Committee of Economy and the Government. Senator Granderson said he objected to the dinosaur because it was wasting the taxpayers' money and because it was inefficient and out of date. "Our country has no use for things that have become extinct," Senator Granderson declared. A small group of senators have protested the dinosaur bill, as it is called, but they have made little headway. Unless something unforeseen happens in the next 2 or 3 days, it is very likely that the dinosaur bill will pass both houses and the world's only living dinosaur will go to join its extinct ancestors. The doctor didn't say anything for a while. He finished buttering the toast and then he poured out his coffee and stirred it with a butter knife. I had the only spoon because I needed it for my eggs. We kept meaning to buy another spoon and fork, but we only thought of it at breakfast time. "But don't worry about me," Dr. Zymer said. "Out in the field on fossil hunting expeditions, I've stirred my coffee with everything from toothbrushes to screwdrivers, and the coffee always tasted just the same." He took a swallow of coffee and then he pointed to the paper. "Doesn't look good at all, does it?" "Well, I didn't think Congress would help us much anyway." "I guess that's about the end of it then," I said. Swallowed a few times, and then I said, "I might as well start packing my suitcase. I don't want to be around when they take Uncle Beasley out and shoot him." "Hold on, Nate," the doctor said. "We're not going to give up that easily. We still have another card to play." "What is it?" I said. "Do you mean we might steal him away from the zoo like the way I said last night?" No, Nate. We must be legal about this. I think we've got a much better way than that. What is it that keeps a senator going, do you think?" "His lungs, I guess," I said. "Well, that helps him all right. But what's he got to have before he can ever get into the Senate?" I couldn't see what he was driving at. I give up. What's he got to have? "Why, votes," the doctor said. "Unless people vote for him, a senator is nothing at all." "Well, I didn't vote for Senator Granderson," I said, "but he's right in there just the same, and I can't tell other people how to vote, can I?" "That's just it. I think you can tell them." "Who, me? I'm not old enough to vote myself." "But you're old enough to ask people to write to their congressman." Dr. Zymer looked over at me and poured himself another cup of coffee. I didn't think much of that idea. How was I going to tell all these people to write their congressman? What was I going to do, stand out on the street corner and shout to everybody? I didn't see how this was going to work, and I told Dr. Zymer so. "No, you don't have to stand on the street corner," he said. "You can tell them on TV. I know a man named Benelli who has a little television program every week. It's called Capitol Sideline. He tries to show people all over the country what's going on here in Washington, and he gets people that are in the news to speak on his program. It's pretty good." "But what's that got to do with us?" I said. "It has everything to do with us. Mr. Benelli called me up this morning while you were out, and he wondered if you would like to give a talk on his show. He wanted to have something about the dinosaur bill this week, and since you've known the dinosaur better than anyone else, You're the logical person to ask about it. I gulped. But I've never been on TV before. I wouldn't know what to do. Oh, that's all right, Dr. Zeimer said. It's perfectly simple. And remember, it may be our only chance to save Uncle Beasley. But couldn't you do the talking, I asked him. You'd know what to say and everything. You could tell them how important Uncle Beasley was for science. I'm afraid that wouldn't work, Nate. People don't really care what happens to science. And they're not going to take much trouble to save a dinosaur just so a lot of silly scientists can study him. But if it's a matter of taking a boy's pet away from him, well, they can get pretty excited about that. As far as I can see, you're Uncle Beasley's only hope. I thought about that for a while. I just couldn't imagine talking on a television program, but if I had to do it to save my dinosaur, well, then I just had to do it. Okay, I said, I guess I can try anyhow. Fine, said the doctor. Now, Mr. Bonelli wanted us to come over to his studio this morning and we could talk over what you were going to say on the program, all right? Yeah, yes, I said, but I wasn't too sure about it. We went over to the studio and a secretary showed us into Mr. Bonelli's office. He was a short, quick little man, and he kept walking up and down the room all the time. He shook his hands with me and had me sit down in a big leather chair. Now then, he said, walking back and forth all the time he was talking, I understand you used to keep this dinosaur in your backyard. I nodded. Was he fierce? Did he ever try to hurt you? Oh, no, I said. He was just as gentle as anything. He just ate and slept and walked around. Only he was a little shy with other people. But I understand you had some trouble with a truck here in Washington. Is that right? That was because the truck driver was in such a hurry that he blew his horn right in the dinosaur's ear. He never did like it when people blew their I see, Mr. Bonelli said. Was he expensive to feed? Not while we fed him on grass. That didn't cost us anything up in Freedom. It just grows wild all around there. That was Freedom, New Hampshire, wasn't it? Tell me about your family. Got any brothers or sisters? What does your father do? How do you like Washington? He went on asking questions like that, and I answered them the best I could. Finally, he stopped and held up his hand. All right, he said. I guess that gives us enough to go on. Now I'll work this up into a little talk for you and have the secretary type it up, and you can read it when your turn comes in the program. You come around at about 7 this evening, and that will give you time to read over your talk and get all set. Is the program tonight? I groaned. Gosh, I won't even have time enough to worry about it. Mr. Bonelli laughed and showed us out of the office. Well, I had one awful day. Whenever I thought about talking on a TV show, I got cold shivers down my back, and my stomach would go all queer. I could hardly eat any lunch. What with the program, and what would happen if I got mixed up and couldn't say things straight? I never was any good at public speaking. I only had a couple of crackers for supper, and they didn't sit any too easy. Everybody gets that way before their first speech, Dr. Zeimer told me. Just remember that once you start talking, everything will be all right. The bad part is before the talking. We got over to the studio, and Miss Bonelli gave me a typewritten sheet, and we read it over together. It was a pretty good speech, I guess. Better than I could do, but it wasn't my speech. Somehow it didn't seem quite right for me to talk somebody else's words like that, and it didn't say anything about how I wanted to save Uncle Beasley. Mr. Bonelli had me read it a few times, and he told me to be sure to talk slowly and clearly, and then he looked at his watch and said, we ought to be in the studio at 5 minutes to 8. My stomach sort of caved in when I heard that, but I swallowed hard and kind of nodded to him, and he went out. Dr. Zeimer looked over at me and said, that speech isn't quite what you wanted to say, is it? No, I said. I guess not. What do you really want to tell them? Do you know? Well, sure, I said. I want to tell them I like my dinosaur and that I'm trying to save him, and they can help if they tell their congressman that they don't want the dinosaur bill. Good, Dr. Zeimer said. As long as you know what you really want to say, everything will be all right. I didn't see what he meant by that, at least not until later. A doctor came over to me and picked up my paper. He looked at it for a while, and then he walked into the next room with it. He came back again in a minute and handed me the paper all folded up. Put it in your pocket until the program begins, he said. Put it in my pocket, and a few minutes later, Mr. Bonelli stuck his head in the door. Let's go, he said. I followed him to the studio, and we sat down at the table. There was a big camera on wheels and some awful bright lights that made me blink. Mr. Bonelli pointed to an electric clock on the wall. It was about 2 minutes before 8. We begin at 8, he said, and your part comes about 10 minutes later. Are you all set? Got your speech?" I put my hand in my pocket and felt for the paper. I nodded to him. Miss Ranelli turned toward the camera and smiled, and just as the red second hand on the clock touched the 12, he started talking. "Good evening, friends," he said in a sort of smooth voice. "This is Ben Benelli bringing you this week's Capital Sidelight, 15 minutes of news and views of the political scene here at your nation's capital. First of all, about our distinguished visitor from Peru, Senor Gasparillo Mendoza, arrived by plane yesterday afternoon as he was greeted at the airport." I was too worried about myself to hear the rest of what Mr. Benelli said. I took the paper out of my pocket and opened it. For a minute, I just stared at it. There wasn't any speech there at all. It was just a blank paper with a few words written in pencil. All it said was, "You know what to say, Nate. Go ahead and make your own speech." Well, I could have just sunk through the floor. Here it was, almost time for me to read my speech, and I didn't have any speech to read. At first, I thought I'd better crawl under the rug and hide, or maybe make a dash for the door. My hands felt like ice, and they shook so I could hardly hold on to the paper. And then I heard Mr. Benelli say, "And we have here in the studio with us tonight. This is Nathan Twilchich, the young man from Freedom, New Hampshire, who raised the dinosaur from the time it was hatched. Well, Nathan, would you like to say a few words to our audience?" Then he turned around and looked straight at me. My stomach flipped upside down and started climbing up in my throat. I opened my mouth, but I couldn't get any words to come out. And then I thought that if I didn't say something pretty quick, there wouldn't be any more Uncle Beasley. That big old dinosaur depended on me, so I just had to start talking. So I looked straight at the camera and I took a deep breath, and I just said the first thing that came into my head. "Hello," I said, out of the corner of my eye. I could see Mr. Ranelli making signals for me to get going. Of course, he didn't know what the matter was, but I couldn't tell him right in the middle of the program like that. "Hello, everybody," I said. "I'm Nate Twitchell, and I live up in New Hampshire. And one morning last summer, I found this big egg in our chicken house, and when it hatched out, it was a dinosaur. And I took care of him, and he fed him grass all summer, and he got to be awful tame and friendly with me. But we couldn't keep him up there over the winter because he needed a warm place. Besides, he was getting pretty big for our little town, so we brought him down here to Washington, and then we gave him to the zoo because they've just got the right place for him, and people could come in and see him. And then, when I thought everything was all set, some men in Congress thought they'd save money by getting rid of the dinosaur. They said he wasn't American, and he was no good for anything. But that's not right. I found out at the museum that America is the only country that ever had horned dinosaurs. They were all living out in Wyoming 60 million years ago, and that was even before the Pilgrims landed, I guess. I could see Mr. Ranelli wiggling his hands and trying to get me to read the speech he'd written for me. I figured I'd better hurry up before he stopped me. "And besides, I took care of that dinosaur, and I fed him, and I watched him grow big and strong, and I sure would hate to have him killed. I know he does eat a lot, but maybe he's worth it, because he's the only dinosaur we've got. He isn't any beauty, but I like him a lot. And I was just hoping that some of you people that are listening will want to save my dinosaur, though now he's really your dinosaur too. And if you do want to save him, would you please tell your senators and representatives to vote against the dinosaur bill? But you better do it quick, or there won't be anything left to save." Mr. Benelli broke in before I could say any more. He leaned over to his microphone and said, "Well, Nate, that was very interesting. We hope you enjoy Washington while you're here. Now that's all for this evening, folks. Be sure to tune in again next Thursday to Capital Sidelight, the program that brings you the people and the news in your nation's capital." The clock said exactly 15 minutes after 8 when he finished. Mr. Benelli turned to me and said, "Why in the name of goodness didn't you read the speech I gave you?" "I couldn't find it," I said. "When I opened up the paper, it was just blank." "Well, look in your pockets. The speech must be there." I went through all my pockets, but no speech. "You kids are always losing things," Mr. Benelli said. "Every time I have a kid on my program, I swear that I'll never do it again. You give a kid a paper, and 30 seconds later, he's lost it. And the funny thing is, you can't even find it again. What they do with them is a mystery to me." Dr. Zeimer came over and took me by the arm. "I think Nate did very well," he said. He had to make up his talk, and he went along. "Oh, sure," Mr. Benelli said. "It was a fine speech, but if it wasn't the one I wrote for him, I was going to have him just tell about his family and his town and what the dinosaur was like and so on. I don't want to get tangled up in this controversial issues on this program. Yes, I know, Dr. Zeimer said. We said goodbye and went back to the apartment. When we got there, Dr. Zeimer took a piece of paper out of his pocket and gave it to me. I opened it up. It was a speech Mr. Benelli wrote for me. Where'd you find this? I asked him. Oh, I kept it and gave you a blank paper in exchange. Mr. Benelli's speech wouldn't have saved Uncle Beasley, but I think yours will. I kept this one so you'd have to make your own, and you did. It was a good speech. Well, you sure gave me some bad moments. I almost passed out when I saw that blank sheet. He smiled and patted me on the back. I know, Nate. It was a terrible spot to put you in, but I couldn't think of any better way. Now, let's hope it works. Nothing much happened until noon the next day. That was when we got a telephone call from Dr. Kennedy. Say, he said, that talk on TV was just a thing. I hear that telegrams have been coming in all morning. They've been coming in by the basket load. The whole Senate's flooded with telegrams, even all the way from Utah and Texas. And they all say, save that dinosaur. If things keep on this way, the dinosaur bill's gonna fall flat on its face. Dr. Zeimer put down the phone and broke into the broadest grin you ever saw. And then he jumped up and grabbed me by the arms, and we went sashaying around and around his desk. Right in the middle of it, the phone rang again. Hello, the doctor said. Hello, Zeimer, the voice said. This is Holmquist at the zoo. Say, what's going on anyway? A whole crowd of people suddenly descended on us from Baltimore. They had some banners and signs that read, Save the Dinosaur, and they all marched up to the elephant house and paraded around. And they said they were going to do 24-hour guard duty to protect the dinosaur, and then about 6 busloads of people from Richmond came in, and they all had banners, and they piled into the elephant house, and then there was a big crowd from Charlottesville, and on top of all of that, a whole lot of people from the Parent-Teacher Association of Fairfax County arrived, and they all had flags, and everybody's getting all tangled up, and the place is a madhouse. The giraffes don't know what to make of it. Don't worry, Holmquist, the doctor said. Just tell the giraffes that it's a demonstration of sound American principles and everything's all right. And he hung up and we went on dancing around the desk. In a few minutes, the phone rang again. It was Mr. Holmquist. What do I do now, Zeimer? He said. There's a delegation here representing all the elementary school children of Arlington County, and they have $217 all in nickels and pennies, and they want to give it to the zoo so we can buy the dinosaur's food with it. What shall I do about it? Accept it, said Dr. Zeimer, and I suggest that you set up a barrel with a sign on it saying Contributions to Dinosaur Food Fund. Better make it a good-sized barrel, too. Well, by the next morning, things were really humming. They called up from the senator office building and said that so much mail had come in that they were handling it with snow shovels, and the senators were all backing water as fast as they could and saying that they had never really been in favor of the dinosaur bill at all. Up at the zoo, Mr. Holmquist was having a fit. He'd never seen such a crowd there before, and the elephant house had been jammed with people ever since opening time. 13 children had been lost by lunchtime, and $1,800.43 had been put in the barrel the last time they counted. Delegations had come from the Warrentown Girl Scouts, the League of Women Voters of Casanova and Hagersville and Chalmersburg, and the United Boys Club of Bumpus and Beaver Dam, Virginia. The whole Brandywine Bird Watching Society came, and the Mechanicsville Fife and the Drum Corps and the Citizens Committee for Secondary Schools from Point of Rocks. It went on all day like that, and Dr. Zeimer looked as pleased as Punch and kept on chuckling to himself. You know, Nate, he said, people are funny. Just think of all those thousands of people crowding into Washington to give all that money to save our dinosaur. You'd think that a live dinosaur was the one thing that the Americans wanted above everything else. And yet, if Senator Granderson hadn't tried to get rid of the dinosaur, none of those people would have given a hoot about it. I guess they don't get excited about a thing until somebody starts taking it away from them. Then they wake up and fight for it. It's like fishing, isn't it? Sometimes you don't get a bite until you start to take in the line.